The Family Gathering, Part 1, The Mother's Perspective. Margaret stood at the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in warm, soapy water, when she heard her son David's voice carry from the dining room. The pride in his tone made her freeze mid-scrub. My wife put her in her place so she'd finally shut up. The plate slipped from Margaret's grip, clattering against the porcelain sink. She gripped the counter's edge, her knuckles whitening as the words echoed in her mind. 28 years of raising David, of teaching him kindness and respect, and this was what came from his mouth? About his own sister? She dried her hands slowly on the dish towel, buying herself time to process what she'd heard. Through the doorway, she could see David's profile. He was grinning, his face flushed with what looked like satisfaction. Her brother Tom sat across from him, his expression unreadable, coffee cup suspended halfway to his lips. Margaret had organized this family dinner with such hope. It had been 6 months since everyone had gathered under one roof. 6 months since the funeral of David's father-in-law, where the family tensions had first begun to show their ugly edges. She'd thought that time would have healed some wounds, that maybe they could all find their way back to each other. She'd been wrong. The her David referred to was obvious, his sister Rachel. Sweet, opinionated, sometimes too honest Rachel, who had never learned to bite her tongue when she felt something was unjust. And David's wife, Jennifer, had apparently decided that Rachel needed to be silenced. Margaret thought back to dinner just an hour ago. The conversation had started pleasantly enough. Talk of work, of the unusually warm autumn weather, of Tom's daughter's upcoming wedding. Then Jennifer had mentioned their plans to send their daughter Emma to private school. Public schools just aren't safe anymore, Jennifer had said, her voice carrying that particular tone of certainty that brooked no disagreement. The quality of education has declined so much. We want better for Emma. Rachel had stiffened beside Margaret. As a public school teacher, Rachel took such comments personally. Margaret had seen her daughter's jaw clench, had recognized the warning signs. That's not really accurate, Rachel had said, her voice controlled but firm. Public schools serve the vast majority of children in this country, and many provide excellent education. The real issue is funding inequality. Well, I'm just saying what everyone knows, Jennifer had interrupted. Private school is better. That's why people who can afford it make the choice we're making. People who can afford it are often the ones who could make public schools better by staying invested in them, Rachel had countered. This attitude of I've got mine is exactly what's destroying community. Rachel, David had said, his voice carrying a warning. Jennifer's just talking about what's best for our daughter. And I'm talking about what's best for all children, Rachel had replied, her cheeks flushing. When we create two-tiered systems, Not everyone can be a martyr like you, Rachel, Jennifer had said, her smile sharp. Some of us prioritize our own families. The table had gone silent. Margaret had seen Rachel's face go pale, then red. Tom had cleared his throat uncomfortably. Margaret's own stomach had twisted with anxiety, the familiar dread of watching her children, her adult children, fall into conflict. That's not fair, Rachel had said quietly. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone. I'm just trying to point out. You're always trying to point something out, Jennifer had said. Always trying to make everyone feel bad about their choices. Not everyone wants to live on a teacher's salary and act morally superior about it. Jennifer, Margaret had interjected, trying to keep her voice gentle but firm. I don't think Rachel meant, Mom, it's fine, David had said. Rachel knows how she comes across sometimes. Margaret had watched her daughter's face crumble slightly before Rachel composed herself. The rest of the dinner had been strained, with Rachel barely speaking. She'd excused herself early, claiming a headache, and had left 20 minutes ago. Now, standing in her kitchen, listening to her son boast about his wife putting Rachel in her place, Margaret felt something inside her shift. This wasn't just a disagreement about schools. This was about respect, about family, about the kind of people she'd raised her children to be. She walked into the dining room. David and Tom both looked up as she entered. Mom, great dinner, David said, his smile easy. Jennifer and I were just saying. I heard what you said, Margaret interrupted quietly, about your wife putting Rachel in her place. David's smile faltered slightly. Oh, well, I just meant Rachel can be a bit much sometimes, you know? She gets on her high horse and— Stop, Margaret said. The single word came out harder than she'd intended, but she didn't soften it. I need you to stop right there and listen to me. David blinked, clearly taken aback. Tom set his coffee cup down slowly, his eyes moving between his sister and his nephew. Rachel is your sister, Margaret continued, her voice shaking slightly. She's not someone who needs to be put in her place. She's not someone who needs to shut up. She's your family, and she deserves your respect even when you disagree with her. Mom, I respect Rachel, David protested. But you have to admit she can be judgmental about people's choices. Can she? Or does she have opinions that make you uncomfortable? Margaret asked. There's a difference between being judgmental and having a different perspective. Rachel works with children every day. She sees what funding cuts do to schools, what inequality does to communities. Maybe instead of dismissing her views, you could try to understand where they come from. I'm not dismissing. You just said you were proud that your wife put her in her place so she'd shut up, Margaret said, her voice rising slightly. That's not respect, David. That's silencing. And I didn't raise you to silence people, especially not your own sister. David's face had gone red. Jennifer was just defending our choice. By attacking Rachel's character, by implying she's a martyr and morally superior, by suggesting that caring about public education makes her judgmental. Margaret shook her head. No, that wasn't defense. That was an attack, and you're sitting here celebrating it. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Meg, maybe— Tom, please, Margaret said, holding up a hand. She looked back at her son. Do you know why Rachel left early? Because she was hurt. Because the two people she should be able to count on, her brother and her sister-in-law, made her feel small and foolish for caring about something important to her. She'll get over it, David muttered, looking away. Will she? Margaret asked. Should she? Is that what family means? That we wound each other and then expect everyone to just get over it? David was silent. Margaret sat down at the table, suddenly tired. When you were kids, you and Rachel were inseparable. Do you remember that? You defended her from bullies. You cheered at all her volleyball games. You helped her study for her teaching exams. She paused, her throat tight. When did that change? When did you decide she wasn't worth listening to? I listened to her. You don't, Margaret said firmly. You tolerate her when she agrees with you, and you dismiss her when she doesn't. That's not listening. David looked down at his hands. For the first time since Margaret had entered the room, he seemed less certain, less comfortable. Your father, Margaret said softly, always said that real strength wasn't about making people shut up. It was about making space for different voices, even difficult ones, especially difficult ones. She felt tears prick her eyes. He'd be disappointed tonight, David, in both you and Jennifer. The words hung in the air. Tom looked down at his lap. David's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching on the table. What do you want me to do? David asked finally, his voice rough. I want you to think about the man you're becoming, Margaret said. I want you to think about what you're teaching Emma about how we treat family, how we treat people who disagree with us. I want you to think about whether you're okay with celebrating someone being silenced. She paused. And then I want you to apologize to your sister. For what? David asked, his defensive tone creeping back. For having a conversation at dinner? For being cruel, Margaret said simply. For allowing your wife to attack her character. For sitting here afterward and being proud of it. She stood up. Your sister loves you, David. She's always loved you. But love doesn't mean accepting disrespect, even from family. She left the room before he could respond, climbing the stairs to her bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. Through the floor, she could hear muffled voices, Tom and David talking. She wondered what her brother was saying, whether he was defending her stance or trying to smooth things over. Tom had always been the peacekeeper, even when they were children. When Margaret and their older brother fought, Tom would find ways to bring them back together. When their parents divorced, Tom had been the one who maintained relationships with both sides. It was his nature to reconcile, to build bridges. But sometimes, Margaret thought, bridges could be built too quickly. Sometimes people needed to sit with discomfort long enough to truly understand what had caused it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Thank you for tonight. For everything. Love you, Mom." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She typed back, "Love you too, sweetheart. Always." She heard the front door open and close, David and Jennifer leaving. Footsteps on the stairs, and then Tom appeared in her doorway. "Can I come in?" he asked. Margaret nodded, and Tom sat beside her on the bed. "That was hard," he said quietly. "It needed to be said." "I know." Tom was quiet for a moment. "David's hurt, confused too. I think he genuinely didn't understand how what he said sounded." "That's part of the problem," Margaret said. "He's become so comfortable with that dynamic. Jennifer dominates, Rachel backs down, that he doesn't see anything wrong with it." "Jennifer's protective of their choices," Tom offered. "Being protective doesn't require being cruel," Margaret countered. "And it doesn't require her husband to cheer when she hurts his sister." Tom nodded slowly. "Do you think he'll apologize?" "I don't know," Margaret admitted. "I hope so. But even if he does, I'm not sure things will be the same." They sat in silence for a while, the house settling around them. Margaret thought about all the family dinners she'd hosted over the years, all the careful navigation of personalities and conflicts. She'd always tried to keep the peace, to smooth over disagreements, to make everyone feel welcome and valued. But maybe, she thought, she'd done too much smoothing. Maybe she'd enabled this dynamic by always rushing to make things comfortable again, by never letting the discomfort linger long enough for real change to happen. "What are you thinking?" Tom asked. "That I've been a coward," Margaret said. "That I should have said something months ago when this pattern started. That I let Rachel feel alone because I was afraid of making David and Jennifer uncomfortable." "You're not a coward," Tom said firmly. "You're trying to hold a family together. That's not easy." "But at what cost?" Margaret asked. "If holding the family together means Rachel has to shrink herself, has to accept being disrespected, has to silence her own voice, is that really a family worth holding together?" Tom didn't have an answer for that. Part 2. The Brothers' Perspective. Tom Brennan sat at his sister's dining table long after everyone else had left, nursing what had to be his fourth cup of coffee. His stomach was roiling, partly from the caffeine, partly from the scene he'd just witnessed. He'd come to Margaret's dinner with high hopes, maybe even unrealistic ones, he could admit now. He'd thought that bringing the family together would be healing, that enough time had passed since the last blow-up that everyone could start fresh. Instead, he'd watched his nephew become someone he barely recognized. Tom thought back to when David was a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old. They'd been at a park, and some older boys had been teasing Rachel about her new glasses. David, smaller and younger than the bullies, had marched right up to them and told them to leave his sister alone. When they'd laughed at him, he'd planted himself between them and Rachel and refused to move until they walked away. Tom had been so proud of him that day, had told David that protecting people who couldn't protect themselves was what real courage looked like. Where was that boy now? Tom pulled out his phone and stared at it, then put it away. He'd wanted to text David, to try to bridge the gap between him and Margaret, to smooth things over. That's what he always did, found the middle ground, helped everyone see each other's perspectives, got the family back to normal. But Margaret's words kept echoing in his mind. Sometimes bridges could be built too quickly. She hadn't said that out loud, but he'd seen it in her eyes when he'd tried to offer excuses for David's behavior. She'd been polite, but firm. She wasn't interested in excuses tonight. Tom understood why. He'd been uncomfortable during dinner, had wanted to say something when Jennifer had attacked Rachel, but he'd frozen. He'd told himself it wasn't his place to interfere in his nephew's marriage, that David and Jennifer needed to handle their own relationships. But wasn't that just another excuse? The truth was, he'd been afraid. Afraid of making things worse, afraid of taking sides, afraid of being seen as the meddling uncle. So he'd stayed silent, and Rachel had been hurt because of it. His phone buzzed, a text from David. "Can we talk? Need your perspective on what happened tonight." Tom stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed, "Sure. Coffee tomorrow morning? Millstone Cafe, 9 a.m.? David's response came quickly. "Thanks. See you then." Tom sighed. He knew what David wanted: validation, reassurance that Margaret had overreacted, that he hadn't really done anything wrong. David wanted Tom to play his usual role, the understanding mediator who helped smooth hurt feelings and get everyone back to normal. But what if normal was the problem? Tom thought about his own daughter, Maya, who was getting married in 2 months. Maya was strong-willed and opinionated, much like Rachel. Maya's fiancé, Chris, was quieter, more reserved. Tom had watched them navigate disagreements, had seen Chris listen to Maya's passionate arguments about everything from politics to which flowers should be at the wedding. Chris didn't always agree with Maya, but he never tried to shut her down. He never seemed threatened by her strength. What would Tom think if Chris celebrated putting Maya in her place? The thought made his stomach turn. He heard Margaret moving around upstairs, getting ready for bed. Tom stood and walked to the foot of the stairs. "Meg," he called up, "I'm heading out." "Thank you for dinner." Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs. Even in the dim light, Tom could see that she'd been crying. "Drive safe," she said. "And Tom? Thank you for staying." "I didn't do much," Tom said, feeling a familiar guilt settle over him. "You listened," Margaret said. "Sometimes that's enough." But as Tom drove home through the quiet streets, he wasn't sure it was enough. Not anymore. His house was dark when he pulled into the driveway. His wife, Lisa, had taken Maya to Chicago for some last-minute wedding planning. Tom was grateful for the solitude. It gave him space to think without having to explain the complicated knot of feelings in his chest. He made himself a sandwich he didn't really want and sat at the kitchen counter, his mind churning. Tom had always prided himself on being fair, on seeing multiple perspectives. It had served him well in his career as a corporate mediator, where his job was literally to find common ground between opposing parties. But tonight had shown him the limits of that approach. Some things didn't have a middle ground. Some situations weren't about finding compromise. They were about right and wrong. Was he really willing to say that David had been wrong? That his nephew, whom he'd watched grow up, whom he'd taken to baseball games and helped with college applications, was in the wrong here? Tom pulled out his phone and opened his text thread with Rachel. They'd always been close, closer in some ways than he was with Margaret. Rachel reminded him of himself at her age, idealistic, passionate, sometimes naive about how the world worked. He'd mentored her when she was deciding whether to go into teaching, had encouraged her to follow her passion even when the salary was modest. He typed, "Hey, kiddo, you doing okay?" The response came quickly, surprising him. "Not really, but I will be. Thanks for checking, Uncle Tom." Tom hesitated, then typed, "I should have said something at dinner. I'm sorry I didn't." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "It's not your fight. But thank you for saying that." Tom stared at those words. It's not your fight. Rachel was letting him off the hook, just like she always did. Rachel, who never wanted to cause conflict, who always tried to smooth her own edges so that others would be more comfortable. Just like Tom himself. The realization hit him hard. He'd always thought of himself as a peacekeeper, but maybe he was just conflict avoidant. Maybe his refusal to take sides wasn't wisdom. Maybe it was cowardice. He thought about his parents' divorce when he was 14. His mother and father had fought bitterly, putting the children in the middle. Tom had refused to choose sides, had insisted on loving both parents equally, on seeing both perspectives. Margaret had called it mature. Their older brother had called it cowardly. Tom had spent his whole life trying to prove his brother wrong, trying to show that you could be principled without being rigid, that you could maintain relationships across divides. But what if maintaining those relationships meant never challenging anyone, never standing up for anything? He thought about the mediations he'd conducted over the years. The successful ones weren't the ones where both parties felt validated in their positions. The successful ones were where both parties were pushed to examine their own roles in the conflict, to take responsibility for their part in the problem. When was the last time he'd pushed David to examine his behavior, to take responsibility for how he treated his sister? Tom couldn't remember, because pushing David would have felt like choosing sides, and Tom never chose sides. He typed another message to Rachel. "It should be my fight. Your family. That makes it my business." This time, the response took longer. When it came, Tom felt his throat tighten. "I love you, Uncle Tom. But you don't have to do anything, really. I can handle this." The thing was, Tom knew she could handle it. Rachel was strong, resilient. She'd handle being dismissed and disrespected and told to shut up, and she'd keep showing up to family dinners with a smile, because that's what she did. But just because she could handle it didn't mean she should have to. Tom set his phone down and walked to his study, where framed family photos lined the walls. There was one from Rachel's college graduation, David with his arm around her shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera. There was another from David's wedding, where Rachel had given a toast that had made everyone cry with laughter. When had things changed? Tom tried to pinpoint the moment when David and Rachel's relationship had shifted from supportive siblings to this current dynamic where David seemed to barely tolerate his sister's presence. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it started when David began dating Jennifer, who was so different from Rachel. Polished where Rachel was natural, strategic where Rachel was spontaneous. Jennifer came from money, had gone to elite schools, moved in circles where image mattered more than authenticity. Tom had liked Jennifer when he first met her. She was smart, capable, clearly devoted to David, but over time, he'd noticed how she seemed to need to be the most important woman in David's life, how she bristled when David talked affectionately about Rachel, how she found subtle ways to compete with or diminish Rachel's accomplishments, and David had let it happen. More than that, he'd participated in it. Tom remembered a moment at David and Jennifer's wedding. During the reception, Rachel had been talking animatedly to some of David's college friends about a program she'd started at her school. Jennifer had walked over, looped her arm through David's, and said loudly enough for the group to hear, "David, save me from another lecture about saving the world. I need to dance with my husband." Rachel had laughed it off, but Tom had seen the hurt flash across her face, and David had just smiled and let Jennifer lead him away without a word to his sister. That should have been the moment, Tom thought now. That should have been when I said something. But he hadn't, because it was David's wedding day, and making a scene would have been inappropriate, because it was just one comment, and maybe he was reading too much into it, because Jennifer was family now too, and he needed to maintain good relationships with everyone. All those reasonable excuses for doing nothing. Tom sat down at his desk and pulled out a notepad. He had a habit, learned from years of mediation work, of writing down his thoughts when situations felt complicated. Seeing things on paper helped him organize his thinking. He wrote, "What are my values?" Then he listed them. Family loyalty, fairness, peace/harmony, honesty, respect. He stared at the list. Then he added 6, courage. That was the one he'd been missing. The one he'd been avoiding. Because real courage, Tom realized, wasn't just about standing up to enemies or strangers. It was about standing up within your own family, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it might damage relationships, even when you might be wrong. He thought about the coffee meeting with David tomorrow. What would courage look like in that conversation? Tom started writing again, this time drafting what he wanted to say. "David, I love you. You're my nephew, and I'm proud of the man you've become in many ways. But I need to tell you that I was uncomfortable with what I witnessed tonight. Not just at dinner, but afterward, when you talked about Jennifer putting Rachel in her place. That language, that attitude. It's not who you used to be, and it's not who I hope you'll be going forward." Tom paused, pen hovering over paper. Was that too harsh? Too judgmental? Number. It was honest. And if he'd learned anything tonight, it was that sometimes honesty was more important than comfort. He continued writing, Rachel is your sister. She's not your enemy. When she disagrees with you, it's not an attack. It's just a different perspective. You can disagree with her views on education or anything else, but you can't dismiss her as a person, and you certainly can't celebrate silencing her. Tom set down his pen and read over what he'd written. His heart was pounding, his palms sweaty. The idea of saying these things to David made him anxious in a way that professional mediations never did. But that was the point, wasn't it? If it was easy, it wouldn't require courage. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Lisa, sending a photo of Maya trying on her wedding dress for a final fitting. Tom smiled despite the heaviness in his chest. Maya looked radiant, her face lit up with joy. He thought about walking Maya down the aisle in 2 months. Handing her over to Chris, trusting that this man would honor and respect his daughter, would celebrate her strength rather than try to diminish it. What example was he setting for Maya by staying silent when Rachel was disrespected? What was he teaching her about what women should accept from their families? Tom picked up his pen again and added to his notes. I haven't been fair to Rachel. I've stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I've prioritized maintaining peace over demanding respect. That changes now, not because I don't love you, but because I do. Because I love all of you, and I want us to be a family that deserves that love. He sat back, reading over everything he'd written. It felt right. Scary, but right. Tom's phone buzzed one more time, another text from David. Actually, can we do breakfast instead of just coffee? I think we need more time to talk. And maybe you can help me figure out what to say to Mom. Tom typed back. Breakfast sounds good. But David, I need you to know that I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear tomorrow. I'm going to tell you what I think you need to hear. If you're okay with that, I'll see you at 9. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response took several minutes. Tom imagined David on the other end, confused and maybe a little worried. Finally, okay. See you then. Tom set his phone down and looked at the family photos on his wall again. He thought about all the moments captured there. Birthdays, graduations, holidays, all the times he'd successfully kept the peace, maintained the harmony, made sure everyone felt comfortable. But comfort, Tom was learning, wasn't the same as health. Sometimes families needed discomfort to grow. Sometimes love meant being willing to make people unhappy in the short term because you cared about who they became in the long term. He thought about Margaret, standing in her dining room, telling her son that he'd been cruel. How hard must that have been for her? How much courage had it taken? Tom had always admired his sister, but tonight he admired her more than ever. She'd done the hard thing, the uncomfortable thing, because it was the right thing. Tomorrow at breakfast with David, Tom would try to do the same. He walked back to the kitchen and finally ate his sandwich, which had gone cold but still tasted good. He thought about calling Lisa but decided against it. He wanted to tell her about tonight, but he wanted to wait until after his conversation with David, until he'd actually followed through on his intention to be brave. As Tom cleaned up and got ready for bed, he felt something shifting inside him, a resolve hardening, a clarity emerging. He'd spent so much of his life trying to be fair to everyone that he'd sometimes failed to be fair to anyone, including himself. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he would speak up. Tomorrow he would risk damaging his relationship with David in order to try to save David's relationship with his sister. And if David couldn't handle that? Well, Tom thought as he climbed into bed, maybe that would tell him something important about the man his nephew had become. Sleep didn't come easily. Tom's mind kept replaying the dinner, thinking of things he should have said, moments when he could have intervened. But dwelling on past failures wouldn't help. What mattered now was what he did next. Around midnight, he got up and went back to his study. He pulled out his phone and sent one more text, this time to Margaret. I'm proud of you for what you said tonight. And I'm sorry I didn't say it first. Love you, sis. Her response came quickly, despite the late hour. Love you too, Tom. Thank you for being here. Tom set his phone down and looked at his notes again. Then he added one final line. Being a peacekeeper doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means creating the conditions for real peace, and sometimes that requires confronting what's wrong. He underlined it twice, then went back to bed. This time, he slept. Part 3. The Sister-in-Law's Perspective. Jennifer Morrison Brennan sat in her car in Margaret's driveway, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had gone white. Beside her, David was silent, staring out the passenger window. They'd been sitting here for 5 minutes. Neither of them had started the engine. Well, Jennifer finally said, her voice brittle. That was a disaster. David didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was strange, uncertain in a way that made Jennifer's stomach clench. Was it, though? Or was Mom right? Jennifer's head whipped toward him. Excuse me? David ran a hand through his hair. I've been thinking about what she said. About how I talked about you and Rachel, and maybe... David, no. Jennifer's voice came out sharper than she intended. She forced herself to soften it. Your mother is overreacting. Rachel got her feelings hurt because she was being called out for being judgmental, and now everyone's acting like we committed some crime. I said I was proud that you put her in her place so she'd shut up, David said quietly. That's not okay, Jen. That's not how I should talk about my sister. Jennifer felt panic rising in her chest. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. She and David were supposed to drive home together, laugh about Rachel's dramatics, maybe feel a little bad about the fight, but mostly feel justified. David was supposed to be on her side. He was always on her side. She was attacking our choice to send Emma to Riverside Academy, Jennifer said, hearing the defensiveness in her voice but unable to stop it. She was basically calling us elitist and selfish. She said that funding inequality was an issue, David interrupted. That's not the same as calling us elitist. It's implied, Jennifer insisted. Every time we make a choice she wouldn't make, she has this way of making us feel small about it. The private school thing, the fact that we bought a house in Westbrook instead of a more diverse neighborhood, the way we discipline Emma, there's always something she's judging. Is she judging? David asked. Or do we feel judged because we're defensive about our choices? Jennifer stared at her husband. Who was this person? David was supposed to understand. He was supposed to see that Rachel's constant political commentary and social justice lectures were exhausting. He was supposed to recognize that his family, his wife and daughter, should come first. I can't believe you're taking her side, Jennifer said, her voice shaking. I'm not taking a side, David said, finally looking at her. I'm just thinking about what Mom said, about the kind of example we're setting for Emma. Jennifer felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She would not be the emotional, irrational woman. She would be logical, reasonable, right. Emma is exactly why we need to have boundaries with Rachel, Jennifer said firmly. I don't want our daughter growing up thinking she needs to apologize for having advantages. I don't want her feeling guilty about the life we're able to provide for her. That's exactly what Rachel does, Jennifer said. Every conversation becomes a lecture about privilege and responsibility and making the world better. It's exhausting, David, and it's toxic for a child to grow up around. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, when I was Emma's age, I was getting bullied at school. Some kids were calling me fat, taking my lunch, pushing me around. Rachel, who was 2 years younger than me, tiny, basically a string bean, stood up to them. Got herself shoved into a locker for defending me. He paused. She's always stood up for people. That's who she is. That's different, Jennifer said, though something uncomfortable squirmed in her stomach. Defending you from bullies isn't the same as lecturing people about their life choices. Isn't it? David asked. Maybe she sees the same thing. People being pushed around, systems being unfair. Maybe to her, the private school thing isn't about us. It's about a bigger pattern she sees in the world. David, stop, Jennifer said, her voice rising. Stop defending her. She hurt me tonight. She made me feel like a terrible person for wanting what's best for our daughter. She made me feel—" Her voice broke. "She made me feel like you would choose her over me." That did it. David's expression softened, and he reached for her hand. "Jen, no. That's not— I would never choose anyone over you. You're my wife." Jennifer held his hand tightly, relief flooding through her. There. That was what she needed. That reassurance that she came first. "Then you need to set boundaries with her," Jennifer said, her voice steadier now. "I'm not saying you can't have a relationship with Rachel, but she needs to understand that attacking our choices, making us feel bad about how we live our lives, that's not acceptable." David nodded slowly, and Jennifer felt herself relax. Crisis averted. They were back on the same page. But then David said, "I don't think she was attacking us, though. Not really. I think she was just talking about something she cares about, and we turned it into an attack because we're sensitive about it." And Jennifer's relief evaporated. "Start the car," she said quietly. "I want to go home." "Jen, please, David, just start the car." The drive home was silent. Jennifer stared out the window, her mind racing. This wasn't how their marriage worked. She and David were a team. They made decisions together, supported each other, presented a united front to the world. But lately, and Jennifer had to admit this had been building for a while, there had been cracks in that unity. Small moments where David seemed to hesitate before agreeing with her. Times when he'd looked uncomfortable when she'd made comments about Rachel's lifestyle choices. Jennifer had dismissed these moments as temporary doubts, little wobbles that all couples experienced. She doubled down on reminding David of why they made the choices they made, reinforcing their shared vision of the life they wanted. But tonight, something had shifted. Margaret's words had gotten through to David in a way that made Jennifer feel like she was losing ground. When they pulled into their driveway, Emma was visible through the living room window, playing with Jennifer's mother on the couch. The sight of her daughter made Jennifer's chest ache. Everything she did, every choice she made, was for Emma. How could Margaret not see that? How could Rachel not understand? They went inside, and Jennifer immediately put on her brightest smile. "Hi, sweetheart. Did you have fun with Grandma?" Emma bounded over, her pigtails bouncing. "Mommy!" "We watched The Little Mermaid and Grandma let me have ice cream." Jennifer shot her mother a look. Emma wasn't supposed to have sugar after 7, but said nothing. She hugged her daughter tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Sounds like a perfect evening," Jennifer said. "Why don't you go upstairs and get ready for bed? Daddy will come read you a story in a few minutes." As Emma scampered up the stairs, Jennifer's mother stood, gathering her purse. Barbara Morrison was a petite woman in her 60s, always perfectly coiffed, always perfectly composed. She looked between Jennifer and David with the assessing gaze of someone who'd raised 4 children and knew when something was wrong. "Everything okay?" Barbara asked. "Fine," Jennifer said quickly. "Just tired." "Thank you for watching, Emma." Barbara kissed Jennifer's cheek. "Call me tomorrow," she said, in that tone that meant it wasn't a request. Then she nodded at David and left. David headed upstairs to read to Emma, leaving Jennifer alone in the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of wine, more than she usually would on a weeknight, and sat at the kitchen island. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Meredith. "Lunch tomorrow? Need to vent about Brad's mother." Jennifer typed back. "Desperately need it. Noon at Seasons? Perfect. See you then." Jennifer sipped her wine and thought about what she'd tell Meredith. She'd have to be careful. She'd learned over the years that complaining about David's family could backfire, could make her sound like the difficult one. But Meredith would understand. Meredith had her own nightmare sister-in-law who was always making pointed comments about Meredith's parenting choices. Jennifer's phone buzzed again. This time it was her older sister, Caroline. "Mom says dinner was rough." "You okay?" Jennifer's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Caroline was the person she was closest to in the world, the one who always understood. Caroline, who had an MBA from Wharton and ran a successful consulting firm, who had made all the same kinds of choices Jennifer had made about private schools and exclusive neighborhoods. She typed, "David's sister was being judgmental about us sending Emma to Riverside." Again. Then his mom took her side. "I'll call you tomorrow." Caroline's response came immediately. "Ugh." The martyr sister strikes again. "Hang in there. Remember, you're making the right choices for your family. That's what matters." Jennifer felt a surge of gratitude for her sister. Caroline got it. Caroline understood that the world was competitive, that parents had to make strategic choices to give their children advantages. Caroline didn't apologize for success or feel guilty about privilege. Why couldn't David's family be more like hers? Jennifer finished her wine and poured another glass, smaller this time. She could hear David's voice upstairs, reading to Emma in the animated voices he used for different characters. Despite everything, the sound made her smile. David was a good father, a good husband too, even if tonight had been confusing. She thought back to when they'd first started dating, 7 years ago. David had been different then, softer maybe, more uncertain about himself. He'd been working at his father's accounting firm, making decent money, but not really going anywhere. He'd dressed like a graduate student and driven a 10-year-old Honda. Jennifer had seen potential in him. She'd encouraged him to take risks, to aim higher, to want more from life. She'd introduced him to people in her network, helped him land a position at a prestigious consulting firm, pushed him to embrace the life they could build together. And he'd transformed. He'd bought better clothes, a better car. He'd become more confident, more successful. He'd become the kind of man who belonged in her world. But sometimes, like tonight, Jennifer wondered if part of the old David was still in there, pulling him back toward his family's middle-class values, their emphasis on community service over personal success, their discomfort with ambition. Rachel represented everything about David's old life that Jennifer had worked so hard to move him past. Rachel, with her used cars and her tiny apartment, and her earnest belief that teaching was a noble calling even if it paid poorly. Rachel, with her political opinions and her judgment and her constant reminders that there were people less fortunate than them. Jennifer knew she should be more generous. She knew Rachel meant well. But every time they were together, Jennifer felt herself being measured and found wanting. Felt like David was being pulled back toward a version of himself that Jennifer had helped him outgrow. David came downstairs, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. He walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, looking exhausted. "She's asleep," he said. "Took 3 books tonight." Jennifer smiled. "She's a negotiator. Wonder where she gets that." David didn't return the smile. "Jen, we need to talk." Jennifer's stomach dropped. Those 4 words, never good. About what? About tonight. About Rachel. About everything. "David, I'm tired. Can we—" "No," David said, and there was something in his voice that made Jennifer stop. "We need to talk about this now. While I still have the courage to say what I need to say." Jennifer set down her wine glass carefully. "Okay, talk." David pulled out a chair and sat across from her at the island. For a long moment, he just looked at his hands. Then he said, "I don't like who I'm becoming." "What are you talking about?" "Tonight, when I said that thing about you putting Rachel in her place." He looked up at her. "I was proud of myself. Proud that I'd— What? Won? That I'd successfully dismissed my sister's opinions? That made me feel good, Jen. And that's not okay." Jennifer felt her defenses rising. "You were standing up for your family. For me. For our choices. By tearing down my sister," David interrupted. "By celebrating silencing her. That's not standing up for our family. That's just being cruel." "She started it." "Did she?" David asked. "Or did we interpret her opinions as attacks because we're insecure about our choices?" There it was again. That word. Insecure. Jennifer felt anger flash through her. "I am not insecure about our choices," she said coldly. "I know we're doing what's best for Emma. I don't need validation from anyone." Then why does Rachel's opinion bother you so much? The question hung in the air. Jennifer opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Because the honest answer, the one she didn't want to admit even to herself, was complicated. Rachel's opinion bothered her because Rachel had known David longer than Jennifer had. Because Rachel had memories of David that Jennifer wasn't part of. Because sometimes, when David laughed at one of Rachel's jokes or referenced some childhood story Jennifer didn't know, she felt left out, like an outsider in David's life story. And Rachel's opinions bothered her because sometimes, in the darkest, most honest part of her mind, Jennifer wondered if Rachel might be right. If the choices they were making, the life they were building, was as fulfilling as it was supposed to be. If the constant striving for more, better, bigger, was actually making them happy. But Jennifer would never say any of that out loud. "Her opinion bothers me because she's judgmental," Jennifer said firmly. "Because she makes us feel guilty for wanting good things for our daughter. Because she acts morally superior." "She doesn't act superior," David said tiredly. "She just has different values. And those values make us uncomfortable because maybe, deep down, we're not sure we're living according to our own values anymore." Jennifer stood up abruptly. "I'm not having this conversation. Not tonight. I'm going to bed." "Jen." "Good night, David." She walked upstairs, her heart pounding. In their bedroom, she changed into her pajamas mechanically, her mind racing. She could hear David moving around downstairs, could picture him sitting at the island, probably staring at his phone or lost in thought. Jennifer climbed into bed and turned off the light, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept replaying the dinner, but from different angles now. Uncomfortable angles. She thought about the moment when Rachel had mentioned funding inequality. Jennifer had immediately felt attacked, had heard Rachel's words as, "You're a bad person for choosing private school." But had Rachel actually said that? Or had Jennifer's own guilt twisted the words into an attack? Number. She shook her head in the darkness. She wasn't going to do this. She wasn't going to second-guess herself, wasn't going to let Margaret's manipulation and Rachel's judgment make her doubt the choices she and David had made together. They were sending Emma to Riverside Academy because it was an excellent school with small class sizes, dedicated teachers, and opportunities that public schools simply couldn't match. That wasn't elitist, it was responsible parenting. They'd bought a house in Westbrook because it was safe, beautiful, and convenient to their workplaces. That wasn't avoiding diversity, it was making a practical choice. They were building the life they wanted, and there was nothing wrong with that. But then Jennifer thought about something her mother had said once, during one of their conversations about Jennifer's childhood. Barbara had talked about how, when Jennifer was young, they'd lived in a modest house in a mixed-income neighborhood. How Jennifer had played with kids from all different backgrounds, had learned early that people had different circumstances, different struggles. "Those years shaped you," Barbara had said, "made you more empathetic, more aware of how lucky you were." Jennifer had nodded, but privately she'd thought that she didn't want Emma shaped by struggle. She wanted Emma protected, cushioned, given every advantage from the start. But now, lying in the dark, Jennifer wondered, what was she protecting Emma from? Knowledge? Understanding? The reality that not everyone had what they had? She rolled over, frustrated with herself. This was exactly what Rachel did. Planted seeds of doubt, made people question themselves, made them feel like they were failing at some invisible moral standard. David came upstairs eventually. Jennifer heard him brush his teeth, heard him move quietly around the bedroom. He climbed into bed, and they lay side by side in the dark, not touching. "I love you," David said quietly, "but I need to apologize to Rachel. And I need you to understand why." Jennifer's throat tightened. "And if I don't want you to?" "Then I'll do it anyway," David said, "because it's the right thing to do." They lay in silence after that. Jennifer felt tears slip down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. She felt like something fundamental was shifting in her marriage, in her life, and she didn't know how to stop it. She thought about calling Caroline, but it was too late. She thought about calling her mother, but she knew what Barbara would say. "Stand your ground. Don't let them make you feel guilty for being successful. But was that what this was about? Success? Or was it about something deeper, about the kind of people they wanted to be, the kind of family they wanted to create, the kind of values they wanted to pass on to Emma? Jennifer must have fallen asleep eventually, because she woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and David's side of the bed already empty. She could hear him downstairs with Emma, making breakfast. The smell of coffee drifted up. For a moment, lying there in the morning light, Jennifer let herself imagine a different version of last night. One where she'd listened more carefully to Rachel, had asked questions instead of getting defensive, had remembered that Rachel was David's sister and not her enemy. What would that have looked like? Could they have had a real conversation about education, about values, about how to raise children in an unequal world? Could Jennifer have learned something instead of just defending her position? The idea felt both appealing and terrifying. Jennifer got up and got dressed, moving on autopilot. When she came downstairs, Emma was sitting at the table with a waffle, chattering about something she wanted to do at school. David was at the stove, still in his pajamas, looking tired. "Morning," Jennifer said quietly. "Morning," David replied, not quite meeting her eyes. "Coffee's ready." They moved around each other carefully, like dancers who'd forgotten the choreography. Emma didn't seem to notice the tension, too absorbed in her own world. After David left to take Emma to school, Jennifer sat alone with her coffee, staring at her phone. She opened her text thread with Rachel. The last message was from 3 weeks ago. Jennifer had sent a photo of Emma at a dance recital, and Rachel had responded with heart emojis and "She's beautiful, so talented." Jennifer stared at those words. Rachel had been nothing but kind about Emma, always enthusiastic about her accomplishments, always interested in her activities. Whatever tension existed between Jennifer and Rachel, it had never touched Emma until now. Until dinner last night, when Emma's education became a battleground. Jennifer's finger hovered over the keyboard. She could write something, an apology or at least an olive branch. She could try to build a bridge instead of burning one. But pride held her back. Hurt feelings, justified or not, kept her from typing. She closed the text thread and opened her email instead. Work. She could focus on work. That was something she understood, something she could control. But even as she tried to concentrate on project updates and client meetings, Jennifer's mind kept drifting back to David's words. "I don't like who I'm becoming." Did she like who she was becoming? If she was honest with herself, really honest, did she like the person she saw in the mirror? Nah. Jennifer thought about the woman she'd been before she met David. She'd been ambitious, yes, but also more open, more curious about different perspectives. She'd volunteered at a literacy program in college, had genuinely cared about making a difference. When had that shifted? When had she become so focused on building her perfect life that she'd stopped thinking about anything beyond her own circle? She couldn't pinpoint a moment. It had been gradual, a series of small choices, small compromises, small adjustments to fit into the world she wanted to belong to. Jennifer's phone rang. Caroline. She almost didn't answer, but habit won out. "Hey," she said. "Mom told me more about last night," Caroline said without preamble. "Are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" Jennifer felt tears well up at her sister's concern. "I'm okay. Just confused." "About what? David's sister is clearly the problem here." "Is she, though?" Jennifer interrupted. "I keep thinking about what she actually said, and I'm not sure she was really attacking us. Maybe I just took it that way." There was silence on the other end. Then Caroline said carefully, "Jen, what's going on? You sound different." "I don't know," Jennifer admitted. "David said something last night that I can't stop thinking about. He said he doesn't like who he's becoming. And I keep wondering, do I like who I'm becoming?" "Of course you do," Caroline said firmly. "You're successful. You're a great mother. You're building an amazing life." "But am I a good person?" Jennifer asked. "Am I kind? Am I empathetic? Would I want Emma to grow up to be exactly like me?" "Jennifer Marie Morrison Brennan," Caroline said, using her full name like their mother used to when they were kids. "You are spiraling." This is what happens when you let people make you feel guilty for being successful. You are a good person. You work hard. You take care of your family. You contribute to society. Do I? Jennifer asked. What do I contribute? I work for a consulting firm that helps companies maximize profits. I live in a bubble where everyone looks like me and has the same advantages. Her voice broke. I celebrate when my husband's sister gets put in her place. What kind of person does that make me? Caroline was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think you need to talk to someone. A therapist, maybe, because this doesn't sound like you. Maybe it is me, Jennifer said. Maybe this is who I've always been, and I'm just now seeing it clearly. After they hung up, Caroline promising to check in later, her voice worried, Jennifer sat with her phone in her lap. She thought about Rachel, probably at school right now, teaching her fifth graders about fractions or state capitals or whatever the curriculum required. Probably still hurt from last night, but showing up anyway because that's what teachers did. Jennifer had never really thought about what Rachel's job entailed, the emotional labor of it, the challenges. She'd dismissed teaching as a fallback career for people who couldn't make it in more competitive fields. But was that fair? Was it accurate? She pulled up her laptop and, on impulse, searched for articles about public school teachers. What she found surprised her. Stories of teachers spending their own money on classroom supplies, working extra hours without pay, dealing with overcrowded classrooms and inadequate resources. Teachers as first responders to childhood trauma, as providers of meals and stability for kids who didn't have those things at home. Jennifer read article after article, and with each one, she felt something shift inside her. This was what Rachel did. This was what she'd dedicated her life to. And Jennifer had dismissed it, had implied it was less valuable than her own career, less worthy of respect. She closed the laptop and put her head in her hands. Maybe David was right. Maybe they had become people who measured worth by income and status instead of by character and contribution. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Lunch with Meredith in an hour. Jennifer almost canceled, but then she thought, maybe talking to Meredith would help. Maybe hearing about someone else's family drama would put her own in perspective. She got ready and drove to Seasons, a trendy bistro in the upscale shopping district they both frequented. Meredith was already there, looking polished and perfect as always, her designer bag on the chair beside her. Finally, Meredith said as Jennifer sat down. I've been dying to tell you about Brad's mother. She actually suggested, get this, that we send the kids to public school to build character. Can you imagine? Jennifer felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was usually the kind of conversation she enjoyed, the venting, the mutual reinforcement of their choices, the satisfaction of being on the right side. But today, she heard it differently, heard the dismissiveness, the assumption that public school was something to be avoided, something that only built character because it was somehow lesser. What did you say? Jennifer asked. I told her that building character is what tutors and extracurriculars are for, Meredith said with a laugh, and that if she wanted to volunteer at a soup kitchen, she could do that without subjecting our kids to failing schools. The words landed like stones. Jennifer saw Rachel's face in her mind, saw the hurt when Jennifer had basically said the same thing at dinner. Jennifer said slowly. What if she had a point? Meredith's smile faded. What? What if public schools aren't failing? What if they're just underfunded because people like us pull our kids out instead of staying and making them better? Meredith stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Jennifer, are you feeling okay? Did something happen? Jennifer almost laughed at the question. Did something happen? Only that her entire worldview was crumbling, that she was questioning everything she'd built her life around, that her marriage felt suddenly fragile. I had dinner with David's family last night, Jennifer said. His sister, she's a teacher, she talked about education inequality, and I got really defensive. Attacked her, basically, and now I'm wondering if she was right. Meredith reached across the table and squeezed Jennifer's hand. Honey, listen to me. You are a good mother. You're making the right choices for Emma. Don't let some bitter teacher who's jealous of what you have make you second-guess yourself. She's not bitter, Jennifer said quietly. And I don't think she's jealous. I think she genuinely cares about kids, all kids, not just her own, and I made her feel bad about that. You didn't make her feel anything, Meredith said firmly. She chose to feel judged. That's on her, not you. Was it, though? Jennifer thought about her words at dinner, the contempt in her voice when she'd said, "Not everyone can be a martyr like you." That wasn't Rachel choosing to feel judged. That was Jennifer actively judging her. The lunch continued, but Jennifer felt disconnected from it. Meredith talked about vacation plans and a new trainer at her gym and some drama with the other board members at her kids' school. All things that usually interested Jennifer, but today felt hollow. When they parted ways, Meredith hugged her and said, "Call me if you need to talk. But seriously, don't let this get in your head. You're doing great." Jennifer sat in her car in the parking lot, not ready to go home yet. She pulled out her phone and, before she could overthink it, typed a message to Rachel. "Rachel, I need to apologize for last night. Can we talk?" She hit send, then immediately regretted it. What if Rachel ignored her? What if she was still too angry? What if? Her phone buzzed. Rachel's response. "I'm at school until 4, but I could meet after. Coffee?" Jennifer typed back. "Yes. Where?" "There's a place near my apartment, Cafe Luna on Madison Street, 4:30. I'll be there." Jennifer started her car, her hands shaking slightly. She had 3 hours to figure out what she was going to say. Part 4. Rachel's Perspective. Rachel Brennan stood at the front of her classroom watching her 5th graders work on their math problems. Normally, she loved this time of day. The quiet concentration, the occasional question, the satisfaction of seeing concepts click in young minds. But today, she couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting back to last night's dinner, to Jennifer's cutting words, to David's silence, to her own hasty retreat. "Miss Brennan?" A small voice pulled her back. It was Aisha, one of her brightest students, hand raised. "I don't understand number 7. Rachel smiled and walked over to Aisha's desk, kneeling beside her. "Okay, let's look at it together. What's confusing you?" As she helped Aisha work through the problem, Rachel felt herself settle. This was what mattered. This work, these kids, this connection. Not family drama, not hurt feelings, not the exhausting effort of trying to be heard by people who didn't want to listen. The bell rang, and her students packed up their things, calling out goodbyes as they headed to their next class. Rachel tidied the room mechanically, straightening desks, erasing the whiteboard, organizing papers. Her phone buzzed in her desk drawer. She pulled it out and saw Jennifer's message. "Rachel, I need to apologize for last night. Can we talk?" Rachel stared at the message, her heart rate picking up. An apology from Jennifer? That was unexpected. Her first instinct was to decline, to protect herself from further hurt. But something made her pause. Maybe Jennifer was genuine. Maybe this could be a chance to actually talk, to understand each other. Rachel had never wanted conflict with her sister-in-law. She'd tried so hard over the years to find common ground, to build a relationship. Before she could overthink it, Rachel typed back offering to meet. When Jennifer agreed, Rachel felt both relieved and anxious. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Rachel taught her afternoon classes on autopilot, her mind already at Cafe Luna, rehearsing conversations that might happen. When the final bell rang, Rachel gathered her things and drove to the cafe, arriving 15 minutes early. She ordered a green tea and sat by the window, watching people walk by on the street. Cafe Luna was nothing fancy, a neighborhood place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Rachel loved it because it felt real, lived in, the kind of place where people came to work on novels or meet friends or just sit quietly with their thoughts. She wondered what Jennifer would think of it. Would she see it as charming, or would she judge it as shabby? Would she understand why Rachel preferred places like this over the polished chain coffee shops in her part of town? Rachel caught herself. There she went again, assuming Jennifer would judge her. Wasn't that what Jennifer had accused her of? Always assuming the worst, always feeling attacked? Maybe they were both guilty of it. Maybe they'd both been so defensive around each other that they'd created the very conflict they feared. At exactly 4:30, Jennifer walked through the door. She looked different than she had last night. Less polished, more uncertain. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair in a ponytail. Rachel had never seen her so casually dressed. "Hi," Jennifer said, sliding into the seat across from Rachel. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course," Rachel said. "Do you want to order something?" "I'm okay." Jennifer folded her hands on the table, and Rachel noticed they were shaking slightly. "I've been thinking about what to say all day, and now that I'm here, I don't know where to start." "How about at the beginning?" Rachel suggested gently. Jennifer nodded, taking a breath. "Okay. The beginning is that I owe you an apology. A real one, not a sorry you were offended apology. What I said last night was cruel, and it was wrong, and I'm sorry." Rachel felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected Jennifer to be so direct, so vulnerable. "Thank you," Rachel said quietly. "That means a lot." "I need you to understand something," Jennifer continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't mean to attack you. Or maybe I did, but not for the reasons you think. I wasn't angry about what you said about schools. I was angry because—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because you make me uncomfortable. Your choices, your values, they make me question my own choices. And instead of sitting with that discomfort, I lashed out." Rachel absorbed this, trying to understand. "I don't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'm not trying to judge your choices." "I know," Jennifer interrupted. "Or at least, I'm starting to understand that. But here's the thing. When you talk about funding inequality or community investment or any of that, I hear it as judgment. I hear you saying that I'm a bad person for choosing private school, for living where we live, for wanting what we want." "That's not what I mean," Rachel said. "I'm talking about systems, about policy." "I know," Jennifer said again. "Logically, I know that. But emotionally, I can't separate your critique of systems from feeling like you're critiquing me personally. Because I benefit from those systems. I perpetuate them. So when you talk about what's wrong with them, part of me feels like you're talking about what's wrong with me." Rachel sat back, processing this. She'd never thought about it that way, had never considered that her passion for social justice might land as personal criticism, even when that wasn't her intent. "I don't think you're a bad person," Rachel said carefully. "I think you're my sister-in-law, and David's wife, and Emma's mother. I think you love your family and want what's best for them. I don't question any of that. But you do question our choices," Jennifer said. "Be honest." Rachel considered this. "I question the systems that create inequality. And yes, sometimes I wonder if people with resources, people like you and David, people like me in some ways, have a responsibility to engage with those systems differently. But that's different from judging you as a person." "Is it though?" Jennifer asked. "Because from where I sit, it feels the same." They sat in silence for a moment. Rachel sipped her tea, thinking. This was harder than she'd expected. Not because Jennifer was being difficult, but because she was being honest. And honest conversations required Rachel to be honest too, even when it was uncomfortable. "Maybe you're right," Rachel said slowly. "Maybe the way I talk about these things does come across as judgment, even if I don't mean it that way. Maybe I need to be more aware of how my words land." Jennifer's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected Rachel to concede anything. "Really?" "Really," Rachel said. "I care a lot about education equity. It's my life's work. But that doesn't give me the right to make you feel attacked. If my passion is driving a wedge between us, then I need to figure out how to communicate better." Jennifer nodded slowly. "And I need to figure out why I'm so defensive. Why I can't hear you talk about your values without feeling threatened." "Can I ask you something?" Rachel said. "And I'm asking because I genuinely want to understand, not because I'm trying to make a point." "Okay," Jennifer said warily. "Why did you and David choose Riverside Academy?" Not the official reasons, but the real ones. What were you hoping for? Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. I wanted Emma to have every advantage I had. I went to private schools and they opened doors for me. They gave me opportunities, connections, confidence. I wanted that for her. She paused. But if I'm being really honest, I also wanted her protected. From struggle, from hardship, from... She stopped. From what? Rachel prompted gently. From having to see how unequal the world is, Jennifer admitted. From having to feel guilty about having more than others. From having to navigate diversity and complexity and all the hard things that I know are real, but that I don't want my daughter to have to deal with yet. The honesty in those words took Rachel's breath away. Because she understood it, even if she disagreed with it. The desire to protect your child, to shield them from pain, that was universal. Thank you for saying that, Rachel said. For being honest. It doesn't sound good when I say it out loud, Jennifer said with a sad laugh. It sounds like I'm raising Emma in a bubble. Maybe, Rachel said carefully, but I also understand the instinct behind it. Every parent wants to protect their kids. But you think I'm doing it wrong, Jennifer said. Don't you? Rachel considered her answer carefully. I think there are different ways to protect kids. I think sheltering them from reality isn't the same as preparing them for it. But Jennifer, I'm not a parent. I don't have kids. So who am I to judge how you and David raise Emma? You work with kids every day, Jennifer said. You see things I don't see. So your opinion actually does matter, even if it makes me uncomfortable. They sat with that for a moment. Then Jennifer said, Tell me about your work. Really tell me. Not just that you teach 5th grade, but what it's actually like. What you see, what you deal with, why you do it. So Rachel told her. She talked about Aisha, who was brilliant, but whose family couldn't afford tutoring or enrichment programs. She talked about Marcus, whose father was incarcerated and whose mother worked 2 jobs, so Marcus came to school tired and hungry. She talked about Sophia, whose family had recently immigrated and who was learning English while trying to keep up with grade-level content. She talked about the broken copier that she and her colleagues paid to fix themselves, the outdated textbooks, the overcrowded classrooms, the teachers who spent their own money on supplies because the school budget couldn't cover basics. But she also talked about the joy, the moment when a struggling reader finally decoded a word on their own, the excitement when a math concept clicked, the pride in a student's eyes when they mastered something they thought was impossible. That's why I care so much about funding, Rachel said. Not because I want to make people feel guilty, but because I see every day what difference resources make. Aisha is just as smart as Emma, probably smarter, but she doesn't have access to the same opportunities. And that's not her fault, and it's not Emma's fault, but it is something that policy and funding and community investment could change. Jennifer was quiet, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I've never thought about it that way. Or maybe I have, but I've pushed it away because thinking about it made me feel bad. That's honest, Rachel said. It's selfish, Jennifer corrected. Maybe it's both, Rachel said. Maybe we're all a little selfish when it comes to our own lives, our own kids. That's human. The question is what we do with that awareness. Jennifer wiped her eyes. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to hold the fact that Emma deserves every advantage with the fact that kids like Aisha deserve them too. I don't have the answer to that, Rachel admitted, but maybe asking the question is a start? They talked for another hour, their conversation ranging from education to family dynamics to their own childhoods. Rachel learned that Jennifer's father had been demanding and critical, that Jennifer had grown up feeling like she was never good enough unless she was the best. Jennifer learned that Rachel had been bullied in middle school, that she'd found her calling in teaching after a mentor teacher had changed her life. By the time they left the cafe, something had shifted between them. They weren't best friends, they might never be, but they were family members who had actually seen each other, who had taken the time to understand rather than just defend. As they stood outside in the early evening air, Jennifer said, I'm going to talk to David tonight. About everything. About how I've been treating you. about how we've been approaching things. I don't know what will come of it, but I want to try to do better." "That's all any of us can do," Rachel said. She hesitated, then added, "Jennifer, I'm sorry too. For my part in this, for not being more thoughtful about how I communicate, for maybe being a little self-righteous sometimes." Jennifer smiled, a real smile, not the polished one Rachel was used to. "Maybe we both have things to work on." They hugged briefly, awkwardly, but genuinely. Then Jennifer got in her car and drove away, leaving Rachel standing on the sidewalk, feeling lighter than she had in months. Rachel pulled out her phone and texted her mom. "Had coffee with Jennifer. Really talked. I think things might be okay." Margaret's response came quickly. "I'm so glad, sweetheart. So proud of you both." Then Rachel texted David, "Your wife is pretty amazing. I think you should keep her." David's response, "I think you're right. Love you, sis." Rachel smiled and started walking toward her apartment. The evening was beautiful, the air crisp with autumn, the light golden. She felt hopeful in a way she hadn't in a long time. Maybe families didn't have to be perfect. Maybe they just had to be willing to try, to listen, to grow. Maybe that was enough. Part 5. The next morning. Tom Brennan arrived at Millstone Cafe at 8:55 a.m., 5 minutes early. He liked being early. It gave him time to settle, to prepare, to ground himself before difficult conversations. He ordered coffee and took a seat by the window, watching the morning crowd bustle past. Young professionals rushing to work, parents pushing strollers, elderly couples walking slowly, hand in hand. All these people living their lives, navigating their own complicated relationships and difficult conversations. Tom thought about the notes he'd written last night, the speech he'd prepared, but now, sitting here in the morning light, he wondered if he should stick to the script or speak from the heart. Maybe both, he decided. Maybe he'd let the conversation guide him. David arrived at 9:02, looking tired. He ordered at the counter, then slid into the seat across from Tom. "Thanks for meeting me," David said. "Of course," Tom replied. "How are you doing?" David laughed humorlessly. "Honestly? I feel like everything I thought I knew is falling apart. Mom's disappointed in me. Jennifer and I barely spoke last night. Rachel probably hates me, and I keep thinking about that phrase, putting her in her place, and feeling sick about it." Tom nodded, not rushing to fill the silence. One of the first things he'd learned as a mediator was the power of silence, of giving people space to talk themselves toward insight. "I wanted to talk to you because—" David paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because you've always been good at seeing all sides. At being fair. I thought maybe you could help me make sense of this." "What do you want me to help you make sense of?" Tom asked. "Was I wrong?" David asked directly. "About last night? About Rachel? About everything?" Tom considered his answer carefully. This was the moment. He could soften the truth, could find the middle ground, could help David feel better without fully confronting the problem. Or he could be honest. "Yes," Tom said simply. "You were wrong." David blinked, clearly startled. Whatever he'd expected Tom to say, it wasn't that. "You asked me to be honest," Tom said. "So I'm being honest. What you said about Jennifer putting Rachel in her place, about being proud that Rachel was finally shut up, that was wrong. Not just tactless or unfortunate, but wrong." David looked down at his coffee. "I know. I've been thinking about it all night, and I know." "Do you?" Tom asked. "Because knowing something intellectually and really understanding it are different things. So tell me, why was it wrong?" "Because she's my sister," David said. "Because I should support her, not—" "No," Tom interrupted. "That's not why. Or not the only reason." David looked confused. "Then why?" "It was wrong because Rachel is a person who deserves respect," Tom said. "Not because she's your sister, but because she's a human being with thoughts and opinions and feelings. When you celebrated silencing her, you weren't just failing as a brother. You were failing as a person." The words hung heavy in the air. David's face had gone pale. I need to tell you something, Tom continued, his voice gentle but firm. Something I should have told you months ago, but I didn't because I was afraid of creating conflict. I was being a coward. Uncle Tom, you're not— Let me finish, Tom said. I've watched you change over the past few years. Since you married Jennifer, since you moved to Westbrook, since you started working at the consulting firm. Some of those changes have been good. You're more confident, more successful. But some of those changes worry me. David was silent, waiting. You've become comfortable dismissing people who don't share your worldview, Tom said. You've started measuring worth by income and status instead of by character. You've begun to see your sister, someone who dedicates her life to helping children, as less valuable because she doesn't make as much money or live in as nice a neighborhood. That's not fair, isn't it? Tom asked. Be honest with yourself, David. When was the last time you asked Rachel about her work in a way that showed you valued it? When was the last time you showed genuine interest in her life instead of just tolerating it? David opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't answer. I'm telling you this because I love you, Tom said, and because I knew you when you were the kid who stood up to bullies to protect your sister. I knew you when you valued kindness over success, and I want to believe that person is still in there somewhere. He is, David said quietly, or he's trying to be. Last night, after everyone left, I couldn't stop thinking about who I've become, about the fact that I was proud, actually proud, of dismissing my sister. What kind of person does that make me? The kind of person who has lost his way, Tom said, but also the kind of person who can find it again if he's willing to do the work. David nodded, his eyes red. I don't know how to fix this. Start with apologizing to Rachel, Tom said. A real apology, not an excuse or a justification. Tell her you were wrong, that you see it now, that you want to do better. She'll probably tell me it's fine, David said. That's what she always does. Makes it easy for everyone else. Then don't let her, Tom said. Don't let her minimize what happened because it makes you more comfortable. Sit with the discomfort. Learn from it. David nodded again. What about Jennifer? This is complicated. She feels attacked when Rachel talks about her values. And I get it, because I feel that way too sometimes. Like we're being judged for wanting good things for our family. Are you being judged? Tom asked. Or are you feeling guilty about your choices and projecting that onto Rachel? David was quiet for a long moment. Maybe both. Maybe Rachel does judge us a little, and maybe we are defensive because we're not sure we're making the right choices. That's honest, Tom said. Now do something with that honesty. Talk to Jennifer. Really talk to her, not just about Rachel, but about your values, about the kind of life you want to live, about the kind of people you want to be. And listen to her too. She might be struggling with the same questions. I think she is, David said. Last night, before bed, she seemed different, less certain, like maybe she's questioning things too. They talked for another half hour, their conversation ranging from practical steps David could take to deeper questions about values and priorities. Tom found himself sharing things he'd never told David before, about his own regrets, his own struggles with conflict avoidance, his own journey toward finding courage. Can I ask you something? David said as they were getting ready to leave. Why now? Why did you finally speak up last night, after all these months? Tom considered this. Because I saw Margaret do it. I saw her risk your relationship to tell you the truth. And I realized that if she could be that brave, so could I. Sometimes we need other people to show us what courage looks like. David smiled sadly. Mom's pretty amazing, isn't she? She is, Tom agreed. So is your sister. And so is your wife, in her own way. You're surrounded by strong women, David. The question is whether you're going to see that strength as threatening or as something to celebrate. After they parted ways, Tom sat in his car for a few minutes, feeling drained but also lighter. He'd done it. He'd had the honest conversation he'd been avoiding. And David had listened, really listened. Tom pulled out his phone and sent a text to Margaret. Had breakfast with David. Really talked. I think he's going to apologize to Rachel, and I think he might actually mean it. Margaret's response. Thank you, Tom, for being there, for being honest. Love you. Love you too, sis. Then Tom drove to work, feeling like maybe, just maybe, their family was going to be okay. Part 6. The Reconciliation. It took David 3 days to work up the courage to call Rachel. 3 days of thinking about what he wanted to say, how he wanted to say it, whether words could possibly be enough to bridge the gap he'd created. Jennifer encouraged him, in her own way. Since her conversation with Rachel at the cafe, she'd been different, quieter, more thoughtful. She'd told David about their talk, about the things she'd learned, about how she was trying to see things differently. I think I've been afraid, Jennifer had said one night as they lay in bed. Afraid that if I acknowledge the inequality Rachel talks about, I'd have to give up everything we've built. But maybe that's not it. Maybe acknowledging it just means being more intentional, more engaged, more aware. David had held her hand in the darkness. I've been afraid too. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of not being good enough. Afraid of not living up to who I thought I should be. They were finding their way back to each other, slowly. And part of that meant David finding his way back to his sister. On Thursday evening, David called Rachel. His hands were shaking as he pressed the number. Hey, Rachel answered, her voice cautious. Hey, David said. Do you have a minute to talk? Yeah, I'm just grading papers. What's up? David took a breath. I need to apologize to you. For real, not just a quick sorry, but a real conversation. Can we meet? Maybe get dinner? There was a pause. Then Rachel said, Yeah, I'd like that. When? Tomorrow night? That Italian place you like? The one near your apartment? Piero's? Sure, 7 o'clock. Perfect. Rachel? Yeah, thank you, David said, for giving me a chance. The next evening, David arrived at Piero's 15 minutes early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first date with Jennifer. He ordered water and waited, his mind racing through everything he wanted to say. Rachel arrived right at 7, looking casual in jeans and a sweater. She slid into the booth across from him, offering a tentative smile. Hi, she said. Hi, David replied. Thanks for coming. They ordered. Rachel got the margarita pizza, David got lasagna, and then sat in awkward silence for a moment. I should start, David said. I've been thinking about what I want to say all week. Rachel nodded, waiting. I was cruel to you at Mom's dinner, David said. And it wasn't the first time. I've been dismissive of you, of your work, of your values for a while now. And then I was proud of myself for it. Proud that Jennifer had put you in your place. Proud that I'd finally shut you up. And Rachel? His voice broke slightly. That's not okay. It's not okay that I felt that way, and it's not okay that I said it, and I'm so sorry. Rachel's eyes were bright, but she didn't interrupt. I've been thinking a lot about why I've been like this, David continued. About why I've been so defensive around you, so quick to dismiss your opinions. And I think it's because you make me uncomfortable. Your choices, your values, they remind me of things I've moved away from, things I maybe shouldn't have moved away from. Like what? Rachel asked quietly. Like caring about more than just my own family, David said. Like thinking about community, about inequality, about making a difference. When we were kids, I wanted to be a teacher. Did you know that? Rachel shook her head. I did, David said. I thought it would be amazing to help kids learn, to make a difference in their lives. But then Dad talked about how teachers don't make much money. How it's a hard life, how I could do better with my potential. And I listened to him. I went into business instead, and told myself it was the smarter choice. It's not a bad choice, Rachel said. You're good at what you do. Maybe, David said. But I'm not happy. Not really. I make good money, I have a nice house, I can provide well for my family. But I'm not doing anything that matters. And when I see you, doing work that actually matters, that actually helps people, I feel ashamed. So instead of dealing with that shame, I've been trying to make you feel small, to convince myself that you're the one who's wrong, not me. Rachel reached across the table and took his hand. David, you're not wrong for wanting financial security, for wanting to provide for your family. Those aren't bad things. But they're not the only things, David said, and I've been acting like they are. I've been judging worth by salary, respect by status. And in doing that, I've disrespected you, someone who is doing incredibly important work, someone I should be proud to call my sister. Their food arrived, giving them a moment to compose themselves. As they started eating, the tension between them eased slightly. Jennifer and I had a good talk, Rachel said, earlier this week. I know, David said. She told me. I'm glad you two talked. She's trying, Rachel said, really trying to understand, and that means a lot. She's questioning a lot of things right now, David said. We both are. About our choices, about our values, about the kind of life we want. It's uncomfortable, but I think it's good, necessary. They talked through dinner about memories from childhood, about the ways they'd grown apart, about the things they'd misunderstood about each other. David learned that Rachel wasn't as confident as she seemed, that she often second-guessed herself, that she'd been hurt by his dismissiveness more than she'd let on. Rachel learned that David had been struggling with his career choice for years, that he felt trapped by golden handcuffs, that he'd been jealous of her sense of purpose, even as he'd criticized her for it. I don't expect you to change your whole life, Rachel said. I'm not asking you to quit your job and become a teacher or anything like that. Maybe not, David said, but I think I need to figure out how to align my work with my values better, how to use the resources and position I have to actually make a difference. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I want to figure it out. That's good, Rachel said. That's really good. As they were finishing their meal, David said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Okay, Rachel said. Do you think there's a way for us to have real conversations about these things, about education, about inequality, about values, without me getting defensive and you feeling dismissed? Rachel thought about this. I think so, but it requires both of us being willing to be uncomfortable. It requires me being more thoughtful about how I communicate, and you being more open to hearing things that challenge you. I can do that, David said, or I can try to anyway. That's all any of us can do, Rachel said. Try. They left the restaurant together, walking slowly through the cool evening air. David thought about all the times they'd walked together like this as kids, coming home from school, going to the park, just existing in each other's company without needing to fill the silence. Maybe they could find their way back to that kind of comfort. Rachel, David said as they reached where their cars were parked. Yeah. Thank you for not giving up on me, for still being willing to have a relationship with me even after I've been such a jerk. Rachel smiled. You're my brother. I love you. That doesn't just go away because we fight or disagree or hurt each other. It means we work through it. They hugged, a real hug, the kind they used to share before everything got complicated. As David drove home, he felt lighter than he had in years. He pulled out his phone at a stoplight and sent a text to his mom. Had dinner with Rachel. We talked, really talked. Thank you for making me see what I was becoming. Margaret's response, I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Love you. David smiled and drove home to his family, ready to start building the kind of life he actually wanted to live.